Good afternoon and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management webinar series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen and I am the program manager for the center and will serve as your moderator today. We would like to extend a special thanks to Bob Hollis of the Mobius Network for providing the webinar management software for this series and Lisa Ruggiero of the National Recycling Coalition for providing technical support. Today's webinar will provide an update on the recycled rubber industry. We have an excellent presenter today, Michael Blumenthal. Following his presentation, we will conduct a question and answer session. If you have a question or comment, please use the GoToWebinar dialog box located in the control panel on your screen. You may also use the dialog box to request assistance if you are experiencing technical difficulties during the webinar. Please note that an edited version of this webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on the National Recycling Coalition and Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center websites. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Michael Blumenthal. Michael was appointed Executive Director of the Rubber Manufacturers Association's Scrap Tire Management Council in October of 1990. In 2007, he was promoted to Vice President of the Rubber Manufacturers Association. Michael has led the tire manufacturers' efforts to expand the viable markets for scrap tires, including co-authoring 3 ASTM standards. His work includes efforts to create ASTM standards for playground cover and mulch and rubber-modified asphalt. Michael earned his Bachelor's of Science degree from Purdue University, a Master's of Science from Michigan State, and an MBA from the City University of New York. And Michael, I'll turn the program over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for your interest in the topic. And my presentation is all on end-of-life tires, also known as scrap tires. The first and probably the most important thing to understand about the scrap tire industry is that our industry is different than every other secondary product out there. We are a demand pull industry, means that our main concerns in the marketplace are not the collection and processing of tires. Unlike every other secondary product out there, that typically is, those are their bottlenecks. Our bottleneck is the end-use markets. There are ample tires. There's a well-defined collection and processing infrastructure throughout the entire country. So we really do need to focus in on the end-use markets. In our industry, just because you have tires and can process tires, that's not the same as the recycling or reuse of tires. And there are different markets, and each market has a different products specification for the tire-derived material that's going to be used. And having multiple markets is both possible and it is very necessary. You can't have enough markets for scrap tires. Next, please. A very quick description of the scrap tire industry. It all began in 1985 when Minnesota enacted the first piece of legislation and regulation that created laws dealing with tires. Prior to that, it was absolutely possible, legal, and acceptable to either landfill tires or to stockpile tires. No one said that you couldn't. Between 1985 and 1990, all but 2 states created some form of regulations on tires. In the late 1980s, there was a tremendous focus in on the scrap tire issue. There were reportedly 4 billion tires in piles. There were very few markets for tires, and there was just a lot of interest and a lot of action on tires. Back in 1990, only 11% of all the tires that were created, about 240 million at that point in time, went to a single market, and that was tire-derived fuel. As I mentioned, the EPA said there was somewhere between 2 to 3 billion tires in piles. Actually, there were really only 1 billion tires in piles, but that was the estimate, and that got a lot of people concerned and engaged on this topic. And the tire manufacturers who we represent created an entity called the Scrap Tire Management Council. I was hired as the director, and the marching orders were very simple. Do whatever was necessary to assist the market expand the end-use markets for tires. We fast forward to 2014. There's very little interest from the federal government on scrap tires. The RMA has established a very extensive library of reports and information on the website. Today's markets are well over 80%, and as I will talk about later in the presentation, we are back to probably the 2007 levels of end use. And the RMA continues to provide the information that the marketplace needs. Next slide, please. There are basically 4 end uses for tires. One is tire-derived fuel, which was the first market and remains the biggest end use. There is ground rubber, and I'll go into the different market applications there. Something we call tire-derived aggregate. We used to call it civil engineering applications, and then material reuse and recovery. Next slide, please. In the tire-derived fuel market, we have cement kilns, pulp and paper mills, different kinds of power plants, industrial and utility. Next, we used to have dedicated tire energy plants, but those have gone by the wayside. A blast furnace can use tires, and in many cases, resource recovery facilities typically use a very small percentage of tires at some point in time. In tire-derived fuel, the combustion, the emissions all fall within EPA limits. It is widely accepted as a fuel. It is considered a fuel by EPA. It is a very cost-competitive fuel. Because we now have second, third, and fourth generation processing equipment, the quality of the chip has improved dramatically from when we first started. And way back when, tire-derived fuel was an excellent market for the tires that were abated from the piles. Next slide. Tire-derived aggregate, we define it as the use of tire shreds in lieu of conventional construction materials, rock, sand, clean fill. And there are basically 4 applications: road construction, landfill construction, septic field, and as a vibration dampening material. All of these have been used. In the construction side, lightweight backfill, road embankments, road base, septic field medium, and basement insulation. In landfills, we're not talking about putting them into the landfill itself, but use as a leachate liner, gas venting backfill. You can use it in a liner in a non-solid waste landfill. You use it as a cap material and as alternate daily cover. Next slide. Tire-derived aggregate. When you look at the marketplace, and especially a place like Pennsylvania, where you have an abundance of rock, you're not really going to be able to compete in the everyday markets. There really are 5 applications, where tire-derived aggregate has both a cost advantage and a performance advantage. First and foremost, in lightweight fill. Secondly, in septic field, as a vibration dampening material, in landfill applications, and in unpaved roads as a road base. It's really good use there. There's also something called tire bales. They began in the 1980s. They were used in the Southwest. Tire baling is not recycling in and of itself. Tire bales are neither good nor bad. It is a form of tire processing. The real issue of tire bales is there a viable market for them? And the way we look at it is, if you can get a professional engineer to stamp a project, that's a very good application. In the ground rubber market, also known as crumb rubber, there are four basic sizes of ground rubber. One is the byproduct of the retread industry called tire buffings. It's been around, literally forever. Then there's coarse rubber, which is about a 1/2 inch to 4 mesh. Ground rubber, which goes from 10 to 40 mesh. And fine grind rubber is 80 to 400 mesh. And each market, each one of these materials feeds into a different market. Next. When you look at tire buffings, there's about 250 million pounds produced every year. It goes into asphalt, it goes into bound rubber products, usually a mat of some sort. Coarse rubber can go into playground covers, running tracks, soil amendments, and mulch. And mulch is a very dynamic market at this point in time. Next. Oh, here we are. Ground rubber, the 10 to 40 mesh, that's for the asphalt market, molded and extruded products, and infill for synthetic turf. Fine grind or ultra fine grind goes into tires, and there's a fair amount of recycled content that does go into new tire manufacturing and your plastic rubber compounds. Next. In material recovery, tires can be used as feedstock material in an electric arc furnace, EAFs. Tires are made have steel, energy, and carbon. They are a carbon-based product. All of those can be recycled in an EAF, and that is going on in the U.S. today. Not a big market, but it can be used. Next. To look at the last published data that we have to give you an idea of how many tires that we produce, we look at all of the tire manufacturing and tire imports into the U.S. We have it by millions of tires, percentage, and weight, and we have an average weight for most of these. And this is how we do our calculations for the generation of tires. Next, please. The market disposition a few years ago saw an impact from the 2007 to 2010 market recession. Some people call it depression. Our industry got hurt tremendously by that economic downturn. The cement industry took a real hit. We lost 1/3 of the tire-derived fuel market, especially in the cement area. All the major markets went down except for exports. A lot of bale tires were sent to Asia at that point in time, and the irony is, even though it really wasn't an ideal market, it really did save the marketplace at that point in time. At that point in time, about 80% of the tires did go to an end-use market. We do have some updated numbers that I will present in just a few slides. Next, please. Showing that the high water mark was in 2007, when almost 90% of all tires that were produced did go to an end-use market. And keep in mind, I use the term end-use market because not all tires get recycled. When it goes for fuel, technically that is not recycling, that is an energy reuse. It's not recycling, but it is a viable end-use market. It serves as a base market, which is very important for the success of the overall market. You can see in 2011 we went down to 81% because of the economic turndown, and I'll present some data in a couple of slides. Next, please. The picture here shows you how the markets break out. It's a little bit easier to see this one. You can get a comparison. tire-derived fuel many years ago used to be almost 55% of the market, and ground rubber, when fuel was 55%, was probably 12%. So we can see that over time the marketplace has changed. It's changed because there is the market. There are new markets now that really did not exist 5 or 7 years ago, and the industry really wants to push the higher value markets, the markets which you get better return on your investment, and that is the ground rubber market. So the market is going in that direction over time, and you can see that the other markets are a lot of small markets, and quite honestly, those really haven't changed over time. Next slide. I've been in the process of getting the 2013 market data. We produce over 300 million tires in the U.S. That is about 1 scrap tire per person per year. We see that the tire-derived fuel markets have increased by 30% from the 2011 numbers. Pulp mills are the major factor here. Many of these mills have made a commitment to use tires. They're less expensive than whatever else they are using. They have is a good supply chain, and this is a really solid market, and it's an expanding market. The ground rubber markets have increased to about 1.3 billion pounds out there. That's probably a 20% increase from the 2011 numbers. The rest of the markets pretty much stagnant. We haven't seen a lot of upward movement on any of the other markets that are out there. But based on the strength of the increases in both tire-derived fuel and in ground rubber, we're back to about the level we were in 2007, which is a vast improvement over the market performance of the last 3 years. Next slide, please. There are other technologies out there that have been a potential market for a good number of years. One is tire pyrolysis. That's a thermal distillation, heat in the absence of oxygen. It's been around over 30 years. There are 2 companies I'm aware of that are actively developing their systems. There is no commercial operation yet, but they're working towards that end. There is a lot of interest in this arena. I know there are over 35 companies that are trying to bring their technology to a commercial state. There's still there are no results. No one is in the market on a commercially viable basis. Even if 1 or 2 of these companies do get into the marketplace, we don't see this as a major market factor. We just don't think it's going to be a large end use of scrap tires. The other market that people are always interested in is the devulcanization of tires. The term vulcanization was coined by Charles Goodyear in the 1840s when he introduced rubber with lead and sulfur, and that gave rubber its consistency, and it wasn't subject to the variations of temperature. Ever since then, people have been trying to reverse that chemical process so they could reuse the rubber. That has not been successful yet. There have been a number of attempts. I don't know of any activity in this right now, and I really doubt this is going to be a market factor at any point in the foreseeable future. Next slide.
Michael, before we move on, could you explain the pyrolysis technology? We have some questions in the audience.
Okay. In tire pyrolysis, it's heat in the absence of oxygen. So you don't combust the rubber. you turn the rubber into three byproduct streams: a gas, a liquid, and a char. You can pull the steel out. In a passenger car tire, there's about 2.5 pounds of high-grade steel, and because there's no oxygen, you don't burn or rust the steel. So the steel comes out very cleanly, and there's a real good market for that aspect. But that's only 10% of the weight of a tire. So whether you get more oil or oil-like liquid or you get more char really is a function of how you basically turn the knobs on the control panel. If you want more liquid, you move the knobs one way. If you want more char, you move it the other way. You can also manage a system where you don't get liquid or that much solid and you get all gas. That is also possible. So those are your byproduct streams, and a lot of people call the char carbon black. Now there's a wide array of carbon blacks that go into making any given tire, probably somewhere between 5 and 12 different grades of carbon black that are used. But carbon black has an ASTM specification. The byproducts of a pyrolysis system, the solid, does not meet those ASTM specs. So technically you can't call it a carbon black, although that's a very common term that's used. It's a carbon char. The liquid that you get out, depending on the temperature, the length, the chemical reactions, I've heard it called everything from crude oil to bunker C to diesel. I'm not sure it meets any of those criteria. It is basically what you're doing is you melt the you basically melt the rubber aspect of a tire and you get some liquid. One of the biggest concerns about tire pyrolysis is that it typically is a batch they use different batches of tires, and for ease of the discussion, let's say they put 100 tires into a batch. Well, batch 1 is going to have a certain number of brand A, brand B, and brand C, and batch 2 is going to have a very different percentage of all the different tires that go in there. So you don't really have a consistent feedstock, and hence you really don't get a consistent byproduct stream. One of the concerns that's out there, and one of the hurdles that have to be overcome. So that basically is the system. Do they work? Absolutely. There's been tire pyrolysis probably for the last 30 years. The issue really isn't can you pyrolyze a tire. Like I just said, you most certainly can. The real issue is there a viable end-use market for the byproducts that come out of one of these systems? And that, to date, has been the great challenge. And to date, no one has been commercially viable. But like I said, there are 2 companies that are putting very large financial investments in these. And we have to wait and see what the results of those 2 efforts are. Okay, I can answer more questions later. Let's move on. Looking at the piles of tires in the U.S., as I mentioned, back in 1990, we did a market survey. We called the states, and we pretty much figured out there were about 1 billion tires in piles over the course of time. Most states have abated their piles. Now we're down to somewhere between 40 and 120 million tires in piles, and that number is a function of how a state will define whether they have piles or not. And I'll show you in the next slide. As you can see in the U.S., most of the states have a relatively low number of tires. Many states are saying they have no known piles. There are 2 states that have more than anybody else, and one in particular, the state of Colorado. We have an ongoing argument with them, but they do have 2 monofills that are currently active. So technically, they are not they're not piles of tires. They are active monofills. As long as they remain active, they will not be piles. As soon as they are no longer active, they go back into the pile listing. So have to wait and see there. But most of the states have done an excellent job in cleaning up their piles. It's no longer a major factor in the marketplace. Next. When you talk about market development, right now there's been a great shift in the overall marketplace. Most states have moved away from market development projects with tires. There's still a few that are very active, but the vast majority are not. The responsibility for market development has fallen onto industry, and they're doing the job. But it still comes down to, in many cases, the end-use markets are indeed they are a factor of the actions by the state agencies. Rubber modified asphalt and departments of transportation go hand in hand. Department of Health often have an impact on the use of tire-derived aggregate, whether it can be only above the groundwater table or whether it can be below the groundwater table. And having the state agency support markets by providing information that answers questions, that removes the obstacles, very important in today's marketplace, and especially in some of the higher value-added markets such as infill, mulch, and loose fill playground cover. Next slide. This is my information. That's my email. You know, what I try to do in this webinar was basically give a very quick, very broad stroke overview of what the markets are, and then obviously answer the questions that you have. If you have any specific questions or like any specific information on any of the markets or health concerns, please do send me an email. I'll be happy to send the information to you. And I suppose now we have time for the Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That was an excellent presentation. If you do have a question, as I said earlier, please use the GoToWebinar dialog box, and we'll pose that question to Michael. We have a couple here. I think this one refers to the U.S. stockpiled scrap tires graph, and that number refers to tires and not tons. Is that
yes, correct? that is in tires. When we first began collecting data, everybody used the actual number of tires. It was easy to deal with, and everybody could get their head around that number. Over time, as the markets changed, you went from the actual number of tires to the weight of tires. And so we now use pounds or tons to describe the marketplace. But when it comes to the tires in piles, states and the industry still use whole numbers. It's just easier that way, and that's how people track it.
This question is concerning the large off-road tires, like the mining truck tires. Are those included in your count for tire generation?
No, we don't, because the mining tires, the truck tires, the off-road tires, as we call them, they are not usually included in a state scrap tire program. Our numbers only reflect DOT number tires, which are on-road tires. That's consistent with what the states do. There are only two states that actually have regulations on off-road tires. One is Minnesota, the other one is Arizona. All of the states do not count or do not have a fee on off-road tires, so no, we don't count those.
And as I understand too, those type of tires are consistently reclaimed and retreaded and get reused.
Most of the mining tires definitely do get reused and retreaded. There's actually a worldwide, um, um, there aren't enough tires out there to meet market demand, so every mining tire definitely does get reused and retreaded. The bigger tires, the off-road tires, many of them do get retreaded, but not all of them. But these things are built. I mean, these things, a good off-road tire can weigh 10,000 pounds. I mean, they are very, very tough, and they have a long, productive life.
Okay. This question is actually a comment on in their area in the Midwest. There's only one company picking up old tires. I guess the question is a matter of infrastructure and how to deal with that, how to address infrastructure question.
That's what we call the marketplace. We can't, I mean, I can only explain the market. I can't justify or defend, but basically the marketplace has changed dramatically. When I first got into this business in the late 80s, there were over 500 scrap tire companies. Today, there are less than 100 scrap tire companies. There's one very large actor out there who controls more than 50% of all the scrap tires that we produce in the U.S. This is how the marketplace works. It's also very similar to how the solid waste industry worked when, 30 years ago, every small town had a small mom and papa's outfit that would pick up garbage and take it to the landfill. Well, waste management came along, and they dominated the market for a very long time. Our industry is on a direct comparison to the solid waste industry only about 20, 30 years later. So yes, this certainly does happen. It has happened. I think the only answer I can give is the marketplace has to respond. If one actor is out there and they dominate, and other actors see there is a market opportunity, I think you'll start seeing new companies get in and try to compete. But this is the marketplace. This is how it works, and for better or worse, this is what we now have.
Okay. This question asks, if the markets handle about 90% of scrap tires each year, how is it that the stockpiles are decreasing and not increasing?
They are, well, it's twofold. One, the extra 10%, if you go back to the slide that shows all of the different market applications, there's still around 8% of the tires that do get landfilled. Now, putting tires into a landfill is not a market. It's not an end-use market. It's clearly disposing of tires. Is it a form of, are the tires managed? Absolutely. Are they managed in a good way? No, probably not. But as long as the state allows tires to be landfilled, they will continue to go to a landfill because it's the least cost legal option that is out there. And so I think it's to the left here. It certainly, we can account for about 98% of all the tires out there. So there's still some tires going to landfills or monofills. That remaining 2% typically will be tires that are inventory at a scrap tire yard. They're in inventory. They haven't gotten to them yet, but that's more than likely where they are. So we can track nearly every tire that is out there.
While we're on this pie graph, the 8% exported, there's a question of where are those tires going? What are the main exports?
Well, when we put this slide together, the vast majority of those tires were tire bales, and they were going to Vietnam. And from Vietnam, they were going someplace into the south of China. Since then, that market has ended. So the exportation of bales to Vietnam has come to a really rapid end. But there's still some tires that are being exported, tire-derived fuel, mostly from the west coast of California, from the west coast, is going to Asia. It's going to Japan. It's going to Korea. It's going to Taiwan. It's going to the Asian to India, Pakistan, as tire-derived fuel. There is some ultra-fine ground rubber being exported, but those numbers are relatively small. So right now, the only large-scale export of tires is in the form of high-grade tire-derived fuel, and that's still going to the Asian rim.
This question asks, is there a list available of the major tire processors?
Yes, there is. We do not provide that. There is a booklet. There's a company out there called it's the Scrap Tire and Rubber Users Directory, and it comes out of a publication called Scrap Tire News. You go to scraptirenews.com. I think it's about $75, and it will list every scrap tire processor in the U.S. and in Canada. We did it many years ago before they began it. Since they have that list, it's better than anything that we did, and that's probably the best source of information.
Do you find a better recovery rate in the states that have a rebate program?
No, not necessarily. If you look at Colorado, there are only 4 states that have rebates. And in Colorado, they say that all their tires go to end-use markets, but the markets are tire bales and an ADC, along with tire-derived fuel. I don't consider tire bales and ADC as viable markets. They're really only there because they are getting money back from the states. In Oklahoma, they have even with the rebates, one of the cement kilns closed. In Virginia, most of the tires are going to a different state. The only tires that are being used in Virginia are the tires that are coming out of the piles, and those are also going for ADC. What we see from states that have the rebates, one of 2 things happen. Typically, you only get low-end markets, and secondly, as soon as that rebate ends, all those markets go away. We have seen that across the board. Every state that had a rebate, when it ended, the markets that they created went away. You look at Wisconsin, you look at Idaho, you look at Oregon. It's not necessarily a better mousetrap. It can be used as an effective tool, but it needs to be phased out over time. So unless you can create other markets, need to take very great care, because if that subsidy ever ends, whatever markets you have will simply go away, and that's the downside to those type of systems.
This question has to do with grants. Are there any grant programs out there?
It depends on the state. There are only 3 or 4 states that have active scrap tire programs: Michigan, California, Alabama, Arkansas, very active tire programs. A number of states do still have annual tire grants. Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska have annual grants. You really have to check with the state tire program for that.
This question, how do you create a market for scrap tires in areas where the largest reuse tire-derived fuel is non-existent because there are no cement plants or pulp or paper mills?
That sounds like that does happen. There are different markets out there, and as we have said many times, many different places, there is no one market that's going to solve the scrap tire problem. Not fuel, not ground rubber, not aggregate. The key is to create multiple markets. If you're in an area that doesn't have any kind of combustion capacity, I would suggest starting looking at tire-derived aggregate first. It is an easy market to get up and running. It can be done in a short time. It can use a very large-scale number of tires. Once you have that infrastructure, the collection and processing infrastructure, it is very easy then to move into the next higher value added market. For example, loose fill for mulch or for playgrounds. That's basically how you have to start. You need to start with a large base market, which is either fuel or tire-derived aggregate, and from there, once you do maximize your efficiencies on collection and on tire processing, then you can move up into these higher value added markets, which take 1 to 3 years to get up and running. So begin with TDA and move up the scale from there.
Do you know of any organizations that promote business development, entrepreneurship, or research of future use of tires?
None that I can think of. We do have information on our website on how to begin a scrap tire entity. That's on the website if you want to get into the business. Basically, it'll give you all the questions that you have to answer to figure out if your idea is viable. It's a how-to. But outside of that, I can't think of any other entity that really is focused in on any of the scrap tire issues.
Yeah. There are several states that have market development organizations, such as Pennsylvania, which the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. We do things like this, and there are other states. I know North Carolina, New York State, I believe, has some. But if you check with your states and see if there are any market development organizations within your environmental agency. Let's see here. What major incentives are in place now or in the future for tire processors? Any potential policy or governmental endorsements that encourage or assist in establishing tire processing operations in particular states or the nation?
The short answer is no. The more in-depth answer is I would suggest that's probably the wrong way to approach our industry. If you remember the first slide I had out there, first thing on the list was we are a demand pull industry. There is a very well-defined collection and scrap tire processing infrastructure. Putting money into the collection or into better handling tires is not going to create any additional demand for tires. If from a state perspective, if you want to look into helping the market focus in on creating demand or reducing obstacles, those are the two best ways to help the industry. More processing capacity is not going to achieve your goals.
This question has to do with regulations. Is ground rubber processing a regulated industry?
Yes.
Okay.
Basically, the entire scrap tire industry is under some state regulations. The state regulations end when that material is sold and it's put onto a truck and it leaves the yard. Then it goes from a material that is under state regulations to a market material. There's a magical transformation when they leave the gate. That's just about every state does it the same.
This question has to do with rubberized asphalt. It's specific to Pennsylvania, but my question would be, Michael, is it being used widespread in this country?
Right now, rubber modified asphalt, and there are 3 or 4 different types of applications, but I'll just use the term rubber modified asphalt to talk about all of them. Overall, across the country, there are over 26 states, more than half the states are using rubber modified asphalt or have used rubber modified asphalt in some shape, matter, or form. Where it is used a lot. It is a well-accepted material, but that's taken years to develop. States like California, Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island come to mind. It's used, on a real regular basis. Other states are currently looking into rubber modified asphalt. There's a long history with it. Also keep in mind that DOTs are slow to change. And you also have 2 major industries that impact the use of whatever goes down on the road. One is the asphalt industry. One is the cement industry, concrete. And there are states that will only use one type of material, or a state will use both, but in well-defined applications. So if a state DOT has decided that all the interstates are going to be white roads and everything else is going to be using asphalt, well, you've just cut your market in half. So there are a lot of factors that impact the rubber modified asphalt marketplace. But right now we face a unique time in that the cost of ground rubber as a modifier for asphalt is less than the cost of the other types of modifiers that are out there. And there's also ground rubber is in better supply than the other materials that are out there. So we're facing a time when the use of rubber as a material to modify rubber actually will reduce the cost of modifying your asphalts. And there are a series of state DOTs that are taking advantage of this unique time. So we're seeing a small bump in the use of rubber as a material that DOTs will use. How long will this last? It's hard to say, but there are a lot of well-entrenched interests out there that have severely impacted this marketplace.
Yes, and I can add to, as far as Pennsylvania, I can attest the the rubber modified asphalt. There was recently a PennDOT specification change for the modifier, rubber-based modifier, which is not a substitute for aggregate, but rather a modifier of the asphalt. The issue with the new design mixes for asphalt is that the liquid part needs to stay in suspension in the material. So this rubber actually holds the liquid in place. So it does provide a benefit. And we've heard reports from several asphalt companies that it is working very well, and they are producing asphalt much cheaper using this material.
There is also a new rubber modified asphalt system that is going to be coming out. It's called a warm mix, and most DOTs are interested in this warm mix because, as the name would suggest, the temperatures don't have to be quite as high as in the hot mix asphalt. There's a lot of interest in this. There are a series of technical issues that are going to make this very. I think most DOTs will move very quickly to the warm mix, and they are using tire rubber to put into these mixes. Once that gets out there, I think we're going to see a bump in the use of ground rubber in more asphalt mixes. It's probably a year away from now, so we're hopeful that this new use is going to have a positive impact.
Can you explain on how old tires are being processed into fuel?
There are two ways that tires go into fuel. In the cement industry, a lot of tires can be used whole, so there's no tire processing that has to go on. But the other markets, in the pulp and paper mills and the energy areas, we are seeing that tires need to be processed down to what's called a 1.5-inch piece of rubber, so that no dimension of the rubber chip is bigger than 1.5 inches. And probably 95–96% of all the wire is removed from that chip. This is made possible by new tire processing systems. And there's no one way there's no one piece of equipment. There's a couple of different systems that you have to use. It's a fairly energy intensive way of making tire-derived fuel, but in the end, it's a high quality chip. We have always stayed away from doing and looking at the different types of equipment because, like I said, there's no one way that you can make tire-derived fuel. But if you are interested in the equipment, send me an email. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that can show you all the different ways of size reducing tire rubber.
Okay, I think that's all the questions there. Thank you for those great questions to the audience. They were very excellent. Again, this webinar, like all the webinars in this series, has been recorded and will be made available via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market Center websites. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you, Michael, for taking the time out to talk about the scrap tire industry. And we hope you'll join us for next month's webinar, scheduled for Tuesday, April 15th at 1:30 Eastern Time. And have a great day.
Thank you.